My mom left without me. The words floated into the cold air of the subway and seemed to stop everything around her. People hurried by with coffee cups and phones pressed to their ears. But he, Daniel Hart, the man in the dark suit, froze where he stood. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed above them, reflecting off the white tiles that lined the tunnel. Somewhere in the distance, a train roared, then faded, leaving only the hum of electricity and the soft sound of her breathing. She was no older than 8, standing beside a small brown suitcase that looked heavier than she did. Her blue coat hung loosely from her shoulders, the fabric worn at the edges, one button missing, yet her voice had not trembled. She spoke the sentence, as if she had said it too many times before. Daniel lowered himself to her height. "What did you say?" he asked gently. "My mom left," she repeated, her eyes calm but distant. "She said she would come back, but she did not." "Oh." The way she said it made Daniel's throat tighten. He looked around, expecting anyone to claim her, but the faces around them were strangers. The crowd kept moving. No one stopped. He noticed how she held the suitcase with both hands, as though it carried something precious. "What is inside?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just clothes." And a picture. Her voice was small but proud. The kind of tone that asked not for pity but for respect. A security guard approached. "Sir, is everything okay here?" Daniel hesitated. Before he could speak, the girl leaned closer, whispering something only he could hear. "Please do not let them take my suitcase." The words hit harder than he expected. There was no fear in them, only trust, quiet and unearned. Daniel turned to the guard. "It is fine," he said firmly. "She is with me." The guard nodded and walked off. A moment later, a train thundered through, shaking the floor beneath them. The gust lifted a strand of her hair, and for a second Daniel saw her face clearly, tired, brave, and heartbreakingly steady. He wanted to ask her name, where she lived, how long she had been waiting, but he did not. Instead, he just stayed there, kneeling beside her, while the world moved on. For a man who had built skyscrapers and lost count of his wealth, it was a strange feeling to realize that all his power meant nothing in front of one simple truth, spoken by a child. In that dim light, between the echo of 2 trains, Daniel understood only this: he could not leave her there. Not tonight. Not ever. The crowd began to thin as the last train of the hour screeched away. The air inside the station felt colder now, touched by the kind of silence that only appears after noise leaves. Daniel stood beside the little girl, unsure of what to do. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, turning her small shadow into a trembling shape on the tiled floor. She was still holding her suitcase. Her fingers were stiff from the cold, but she refused to let it go. Daniel noticed her shoulders shake slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. He pulled a handkerchief from his coat pocket and offered it to her. "It is warmer if you hold this," he said quietly. The girl blinked, looking at the cloth like it was something too fine for her hands. "I am okay," she said. Her voice was polite, almost rehearsed. She was used to refusing help. A man selling newspapers nearby watched them suspiciously. "Hey, mister," he called out. "She bothering you?" His tone was casual but sharp, the kind that turns kindness into something questionable. Daniel turned his head slowly. "No, she is not bothering me." The man shrugged and went back to stacking his papers, muttering something under his breath. Daniel could not make out the words, but he knew the sound of judgment when he heard it. He had lived long enough to recognize the way people look when they believe they understand a story they have not heard. The girl seemed to sense it too. She took a small step back, her chin lifting slightly. "People think I am lost," she said. "But I am not. I am just waiting." Daniel knelt again so that his eyes met hers. "Who are you waiting for?" She hesitated, looking toward the tunnel. "My mom. She said she would come back after she found a place. Sometimes she comes late." Her gaze stayed on the empty tracks, as if the next train might carry her world back. "How long have you been waiting?" he asked. The girl thought for a moment. "Since the morning. But I do not mind. The people in the booth let me sit when it rains." He looked toward the ticket booth. The attendant avoided his eyes. That told him everything. Daniel's phone buzzed inside his pocket. A reminder, dinner with investors. He ignored it. The sound felt obscene in this place. Here, time did not run on calendars or contracts, it moved with hunger, with hope, with trains that never stopped long enough. "You cannot stay here tonight," Daniel said. His voice came out firmer than he intended. "It is too cold." "I have my coat," she replied, "and my suitcase." He wanted to tell her that a coat and a suitcase could not keep out loneliness, but he stopped himself. She did not need another adult reminding her of what she already knew. Instead, he said softly, "What is your name?" "Lila," she said. "My mom calls me Lila when she is happy. When she is not, she calls me girl." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then I will call you Lila." Her expression softened, a small spark of relief passing over her face. No one had said her name kindly in a long time. Another gust of wind rushed through as a train passed without stopping. Daniel looked around. The crowd was almost gone now, and the janitor had begun locking one of the side gates. "You will get locked in here," Daniel said. Lila hugged her suitcase tighter. "It is okay. They do not see me if I sit still." Something inside him twisted. Those words, "they do not see me," carried the same loneliness he had spent years hiding behind money and meetings. He realized that invisibility was not only for the poor. He stood up and reached into his pocket. "Come on," he said gently. "You can wait somewhere warm, just until morning." Lila's eyes widened with suspicion. "You do not have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I want to." She hesitated, scanning his face for a reason to trust him. His suit, his watch, his calm voice, they all belonged to another world. But there was something in his eyes, something quiet and certain, that made her nod. "Can I bring my suitcase?" she asked. "Of course," he replied. As they walked toward the exit, the clerk at the booth called out, "Sir, that kid's been around all week. You are wasting your time." Daniel did not answer. He simply placed a folded bill on the counter and kept walking. Outside, the city's breath was visible, steam rising from manholes, headlights slicing through the falling snow. Lila's small steps left faint prints beside his larger ones. The contrast made him strangely aware of how easily a life could be erased. They reached the curb. Daniel raised his hand, and a taxi slowed to a stop. The driver glanced in the mirror at the pair of them, clearly puzzled, but said nothing. Lila climbed in, clutching her suitcase. Daniel followed, shutting the door behind them. The heater hummed, filling the cab with a tired warmth. Lila leaned her head against the window, eyes heavy but awake. "Do you think she will come back tomorrow?" she asked softly. Daniel looked out at the blur of lights streaking past. "Maybe," he said, "but until then, you do not have to wait alone." Her eyelids fluttered, and she nodded, the first hint of peace settling across her face. As the taxi merged into traffic, Daniel realized that somewhere between the tunnels and the snow, the night had changed. It was no longer just about helping a lost child. It was about finding something he had lost too. The taxi rolled to a quiet stop in front of a hotel on Lexington Avenue. It was one of those places where the lobby smelled of polished wood and expensive soap, a world built for people who never worried about the cost of warmth. Daniel stepped out first, the cold wind snapping at his coat. When he opened the door for her, Lila hesitated. Her small hand gripped the suitcase handle so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "It is all right," Daniel said. "We are just going inside to get warm. You do not have to stay if you do not want to." Lila nodded once and followed him. The doorman looked puzzled, eyes flicking from Daniel's tailored coat to the girl's frayed one. He opened the door anyway, though his polite smile faltered. Inside, the heat wrapped around them instantly. The marble floors shone under golden light. A soft piano tune played from hidden speakers. To Lila, it felt like stepping into another universe, one where people did not shiver, and everything smelled of safety. She stood still, afraid her shoes might leave dirt marks. The woman at the reception desk smiled mechanically. "Good evening, Mr. Hart. Checking in?" "Yes," Daniel said. "One room, 2 beds, please." Her eyes flickered toward Lila, and for a second her voice caught. "Sir, we—" Daniel met her gaze firmly. 2 beds, tonight only." The receptionist nodded quickly and handed over the key card. Her professional smile returned, but her eyes lingered on the girl with quiet confusion. Daniel took the card and motioned for Lila to follow him. They rode the elevator in silence. The carpeted floor muffled every sound. Lila's reflection in the mirrored wall looked smaller than she felt. She stared at it as if she were looking at someone she had once known but forgotten. When the elevator doors opened, Daniel led her down a long hallway to a room near the end. He unlocked the door and stepped aside. The room was bright, with white sheets and a tall window overlooking the city. Steam rose gently from a heater in the corner. Lila stood at the doorway, eyes wide. "It is very clean," she said softly. Daniel smiled. "It should be. They charge enough for it." She set her suitcase near the window and walked slowly around the room. Her small hand brushed across the smooth surface of the desk, the lampshade, and finally the blanket folded at the end of the bed. "Do people live here?" she asked. "Only for a little while," Daniel said. "Then they move on." She nodded as if that made sense. "Like trains." He looked at her for a long moment, struck again by the simple way she saw truth. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like trains." There was a knock at the door. A bellhop stood outside with a tray, 2 cups of hot chocolate, and a plate of sandwiches. Daniel thanked him and handed him a tip. The boy glanced at Lila and smiled. "Good evening, miss." Lila blushed and whispered, "Thank you." When the door closed, she climbed carefully onto one of the chairs. Daniel placed a cup in front of her. Steam curled into the air like soft smoke. "Drink it slowly," he said. "It is hot." She took a cautious sip. Her eyes widened. "It tastes like home," she said, then looked embarrassed. "I mean like something good," Daniel smiled. "That is exactly what it should taste like." For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the faint hum of traffic below. Lila ate half a sandwich and wrapped the other half in a napkin, tucking it into her suitcase. "You can finish it," Daniel said gently. "I will save it," she replied, "in case she comes back tonight." Daniel nodded slowly. He wanted to tell her that her mother might not return, but the words felt cruel in the face of her quiet hope. Hope was the only thing keeping her upright, and he had no right to take it from her. After a while, Lila climbed onto one of the beds. She sat cross-legged, her small frame swallowed by the large white blanket. "You have a daughter?" she asked suddenly. Danielle looked up, startled. "No, I do not." She tilted her head. "You look like someone who used to read stories." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I forgot how." "Then you can learn again," she said simply, and turned toward the window. The city lights glittered outside, 1,000 golden eyes blinking through the winter air. For a long time, Daniel watched her reflection in the glass. She looked peaceful now, her breathing even, her face calm. The suitcase rested beside the bed, still within her reach. As the night deepened, Daniel sat by the desk, pretending to read emails that no longer seemed important. Every so often, he looked toward the child sleeping beneath the white blanket and felt something shift quietly inside him. Around 2 in the morning, he rose to pull the curtain closed. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, covering the streets below in a soft white silence. He looked back at Lila, her small hand still curled around the edge of her suitcase, and realized she had carried her entire world in that one gesture of trust. He turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint city glow to fill the room. As he lay down on the other bed, the thought came to him like a whisper he could not ignore. She was not the only one who had been left behind. And for the first time in years, Daniel Hart closed his eyes, knowing that the morning might matter. Morning arrived slowly, brushing gold across the edges of the hotel curtains. The hum of the city had returned, low and constant, like the sound of an enormous heart beating beneath the streets. Daniel woke to that rhythm, blinking against the pale light. For a second he forgot where he was. Then he saw the small suitcase near the window, the blanket on the other bed neatly folded, and the space where Lila had been empty. He sat up fast. The air in the room felt thinner. The cup from last night still sat on the desk, a ring of chocolate dried at the rim. He looked toward the door. The latch was open. A faint trail of wet footprints led from the carpet to the hallway. Daniel grabbed his coat and stepped out. The elevator ride down felt endless. When the doors opened to the lobby, the morning rush of business travelers filled the space with noise. He moved straight to the front desk. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "Did you see the little girl who was with me last night?" The same woman from the evening shift looked up, startled. The little girl? She left early, sir. Around 5, maybe a little before sunrise. She said you were sleeping and she did not want to wake you. Daniel's chest tightened. Did she say where she was going? The woman hesitated. She just thanked us for the hot chocolate and asked me for a napkin. She folded it and put something inside. I thought it was sweet. Daniel frowned. Did she leave anything? The woman shook her head. No, sir, only the key card. She left it right there on the counter. He stepped back, feeling an ache he could not name. Outside the glass doors, snowflakes were falling again, slow and heavy. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the cold. On the sidewalk, people hurried by, their collars turned up, their voices muffled by scarves. He scanned the street, searching for a small figure in a blue coat, for the tiny brown suitcase, for any sign that she was still close. But the city swallowed people easily. It always had. Daniel walked toward the corner, his shoes crunching through the thin layer of snow. The wind carried the smell of coffee from a nearby shop. He stepped inside, ordered 2 cups without thinking, and sat by the window. For a while, he watched strangers walk past, each one a blur of motion. He reached into his pocket to pull out his phone, intending to call someone, maybe the police, maybe the hotel manager, but then he stopped. He imagined what the report would sound like. A well-dressed man looking for a little girl he met at a subway station. The thought made him feel helpless. As he sat there, something in the reflection of the window caught his eye. Across the street, by the edge of a small park, a blue color moved against the white snow. Daniel stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his coffee. He pushed open the door and hurried outside. The park was quiet except for the caw of distant crows. On a wooden bench near the fountain, Lila sat with her suitcase beside her. She was feeding crumbs of bread to a flock of pigeons. The sight of her calm, small, alive made his chest release the breath he had not realized he was holding. He walked over slowly. You left early, he said. Lila turned. Her eyes widened slightly, but she smiled. You were still sleeping, she said. I did not want to bother you. He sat down next to her. You could have waited until I woke up. I did not want you to feel like you had to keep me, she said simply. You already gave me a warm place. That was enough. Daniel studied her face, searching for anger or fear. There was none, only that same quiet pride that had first stopped him in the subway. You should not have to be out here alone, he said. Lila shrugged. I am not alone. The lady who cleans the park lets me stay near the benches sometimes. She says I make the pigeons happy. He smiled despite himself. You make people happy too. She looked at him curiously. You do not look happy. Daniel paused. Maybe I forgot how. Oh, then you can learn again, she said, repeating her words from the night before. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them felt softer, the air quieter. Snow collected on the suitcase between them. Daniel brushed it away with his gloved hand. What is inside? He asked again. Lila hesitated, then opened the latches carefully. Inside were a few folded clothes, a worn stuffed rabbit, and a photograph bent at the corners. She held it out to him. In the picture, a woman with tired eyes but a warm smile stood beside a younger version of Lila. They were both holding ice cream cones. That is my mom, Lila said. She said we would go to the park again when things got better. Daniel looked at the photograph, then at the child beside him. And you believe her? Lila nodded. I think people do not always mean to leave. Sometimes they just cannot stay. Her words landed softly but carried weight. Daniel leaned back on the bench, watching the pigeons scatter and return. You are very wise, Lila, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. Grandma used to say that too. The snow began to fall harder, blurring the edges of the city. Daniel stood and took off his scarf, wrapping it gently around her neck. Let us find somewhere warmer, he said. Lila looked up at him, unsure for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but I have to bring my suitcase. Of course, he said. Always. As they walked toward the corner together, Daniel realized that something had changed again. The night before, he had felt responsible for her, but now, walking beside her small, determined steps, he felt something closer to respect. She was not a problem to solve. She was a reminder, a mirror held quietly to his heart that dignity could live even in the smallest hands. The snow was falling harder by the time they reached the street corner. The traffic lights glowed faintly through the white haze, and every sound seemed to soften under the weight of winter. Daniel raised his arm to hail another taxi. When the car pulled over, he opened the door for Lila and waited until she climbed in, still clutching her small suitcase. Inside the taxi, warmth fogged the windows. Lila's breath made small clouds on the glass as she traced invisible shapes with her finger. Daniel watched her reflection, wondering what she saw in this moving blur of city lights. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. "Somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere warm." She nodded without another word. Her trust was quiet but complete, and that made him feel both grateful and unworthy at the same time. The car stopped in front of a small apartment building on the Upper East Side. Unlike the hotel, this place had no marble floors or chandeliers. It was simple, private, a place Daniel used when he wanted to disappear from his own world. He led Lila inside, unlocking the door to the ground floor unit. The air smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. A single lamp illuminated the living room, where books were stacked on a wooden table and a wool blanket rested over a gray sofa. Lila stepped inside, glancing around with cautious curiosity. "This is your house?" she asked. "One of them," Daniel said. "It is not much, but it will do for now." "Oh, one." She smiled a little. "It is warm." Daniel closed the door behind them and helped her take off her coat. Snowflakes melted into her hair. He handed her a towel. "You can dry off. The bathroom is down the hall, first door on the right." Lila disappeared into the hallway, her footsteps soft against the floor. Daniel took off his own coat and exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, his home did not feel empty. The silence between walls carried a new kind of presence, the kind that came from being needed, not from wealth or power. When Lila returned, she was wearing one of his oversized sweaters that nearly reached her knees. "It smells nice," she said. Daniel smiled. "That is because it has not been worn by anyone important." She tilted her head. "You are important. Not in the ways that matter," he said. They ate together at the kitchen counter, scrambled eggs, toast, and a glass of warm milk. Lila ate carefully, as if every bite required permission. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." "You do not have to thank me," Daniel said. "Everyone deserves to eat." She looked at him seriously. "Not everyone gets to." Her words sat heavy between them. He had spent his life building a company that measured everything in numbers, profit, shares, growth, but now he realized that not everything valuable could be counted. After breakfast, Lila wandered to the bookshelf and ran her fingers over the spines. "You have many stories," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied, "but I have not read most of them." "Why not?" He hesitated. "Because I was busy making money." She looked up at him. "Did it make you happy?" The question hit him harder than he expected. "No," he said finally. "It made me tired." Lila nodded as if she understood. Then she pointed to a small framed photograph on the shelf. It showed Daniel and a woman standing on a sailboat, both younger, both smiling. "Is that your wife?" she asked. "It was," Daniel said quietly. "She passed away many years ago." "I am sorry," Lila whispered. "My grandma says the people we love do not really go away. They just move to the quiet places." He smiled faintly. "She sounds wise." "She was," Lila said. "She used to tell stories about angels and trains that never stopped. I liked those." "Oh, maybe you can tell me one later," Daniel said. Her eyes lit up. "Okay." Outside, the storm thickened. Daniel pulled the curtains closed and turned on the fireplace. The gentle crackle filled the room. Lila curled up on the couch with her suitcase beside her, the stuffed rabbit peeking from the half-open lid. "Do you ever get scared?" Daniel asked after a while. "Sometimes," she said. "But I talk to Grandma in my head. That helps." He nodded slowly. "I talk to my wife sometimes. In my head, too." "Then we both have someone," she said, smiling. The warmth of the fire reflected in her eyes. For the first time since he met her, she looked comfortable, not just warm, but safe. Daniel watched her as she leaned back, her eyelids growing heavy. The rhythmic sound of the wind outside mixed with the soft pop of the firewood. Within minutes, she had fallen asleep, her small hand still resting on her suitcase. Daniel adjusted the blanket over her shoulders and stood for a long time, just watching. Something deep inside him shifted again. The line between stranger and protector had blurred, replaced by a quiet sense of belonging he had not felt in decades. He turned toward the window, watching the snow settle over the empty street. The world outside was cold and distant, but in this small corner of it, something warm had begun to grow. As he looked back at Lila, sleeping soundly beneath the orange glow of the fireplace, Daniel realized that this moment, the silence, the trust, the fragile peace was the beginning of something he could not yet name. It was not charity. It was not guilt. It was something far simpler and far more human. For the first time in years, he whispered a silent promise, not to save her, but to stay. The next morning came quietly, painted in shades of pale gray and gold. The snow outside had stopped falling, leaving the streets wrapped in a soft white silence. The fire in the living room had gone out, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and toast. Daniel woke on the couch, still wearing the clothes from the night before. For a few seconds, he lay there, listening to the calm. It felt different, lighter somehow. Then he turned his head toward the smaller sofa where Lila had been sleeping. The blanket was folded neatly. The suitcase was gone. A chill deeper than the winter air passed through him. He sat up quickly and looked around the apartment. The kitchen counter was clean. The mug she had used was rinsed and placed upside down beside the sink. On the table sat a folded napkin. He reached for it with a sense of dread he could not explain. Inside the napkin was a small drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands under falling snow. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for letting me stay warm." Daniel closed his eyes. The silence pressed against his chest like a weight. He had seen people leave before, but this was different. This was a goodbye that hurt precisely because it came without warning or blame. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The morning air stung his face. The city was waking up, cars starting, shop doors unlocking, the smell of roasted coffee floating through the cold. Daniel walked fast, scanning every corner, every small figure that passed. He checked the park first. The bench where they had fed pigeons was empty. Only a few crumbs of bread remained, half buried in the snow. He asked a groundskeeper if he had seen a little girl with a blue coat and a brown suitcase. The man shook his head. "Sorry, sir. Kids do not usually come out this early." Daniel thanked him and kept walking. Each step felt heavier. He returned to the subway station where they had first met. The same white tiles, the same hum of trains echoing through the tunnel. People moved quickly, faces hidden behind scarves and purpose. For a moment he thought he saw her near the vending machine, but when he turned, it was another child, smaller, holding her mother's hand. Daniel leaned against a column, the sound of the next train roaring in his ears. He tried to tell himself she was fine, that she had gone to find her mother, that this was how it was meant to be. But the ache in his chest told another story, the story of a man who had been given a second chance to care and had lost it overnight. He bought a cup of hot coffee from the kiosk and sat on the same bench where she had stood. He remembered her words. People do not always mean to leave. Sometimes they just cannot stay. It was as if she had already known this moment would come. An old woman selling newspapers stopped near him. "You all right, sir? You look pale." Daniel forced a small smile. "Just tired." She nodded and pointed to the cup in his hand. "Careful, dear. That will go cold if you just hold it." He looked down at the coffee, steam fading into the cold air. "It already did," he murmured. After an hour, he gave up the search and returned home. The apartment felt emptier than ever. He walked past the couch, past the fireplace, to the window where her small handprints still faintly marked the glass. He touched the spot gently, then turned toward the table. The drawing was still there, her childlike handwriting looping across the napkin. He slipped it into his pocket like something fragile, something sacred. The rest of the day passed in a haze. He tried to work, but the words on his laptop screen blurred. He tried to eat, but every sound in the room reminded him of her, the way she said, "You are important." The way she wrapped half her sandwich to save for someone else. As evening settled, Daniel found himself standing by the window again. Snow had started to fall once more, soft and endless. Down on the street, People hurried home, their breath visible in the fading light. He wondered if Lila was among them, suitcase in hand, finding another warm corner to wait in. He pressed his forehead against the glass. The reflection staring back at him looked older, lonelier, but not entirely broken. Something in him had changed. The emptiness was still there, but beneath it was a pulse of something new, determination. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop again, and began typing. It was not an email this time. It was a search request addresses of children's shelters, outreach programs, and safe houses in the city. If she had gone anywhere, someone must have seen her. When he finished, he looked once more at the napkin drawing beside his keyboard. The two figures in the snow seemed to smile at him, as if reminding him that kindness is not measured by whether it is returned. Outside, the city glowed faintly under the streetlights, alive and indifferent. But inside, something fragile had taken root, a promise that he would not let her vanish into that indifference. He whispered into the stillness of the room, not sure if anyone could hear. "I will find you, Lila." The sound was soft, almost lost beneath the hum of the city, yet it lingered, carried by the same quiet hope that had once filled a subway station on a winter night, when a small voice had said, "My mom left without me." And though she was gone, Daniel knew the story between them was not over. It had only just begun. 3 days passed before Daniel allowed himself to admit that she was truly gone. The apartment had returned to its old stillness, the kind of quiet that presses on the walls. Yet even in that silence, she lingered. Her folded blanket, her small cup on the counter, and the faint scent of her hair on the sweater she had worn all whispered of a life that had brushed against his and then disappeared. He could not work. The screens of his office filled with numbers that no longer mattered. Instead, he found himself walking through subway stations, over bridges, down long city blocks, searching faces, listening for that small, calm voice. Each time he passed a child holding a parent's hand, his chest ached. Each time he saw someone alone, he slowed down, just in case. On the 4th morning, he walked into the police precinct near his office. The officer at the desk looked up, bored and half awake. Daniel placed the napkin drawing on the counter. "I am looking for this girl," he said. The officer examined the drawing, then the photograph Daniel had printed from memory. "Do you know her full name?" "Lila," Daniel said. "She is about 8 years old. She was wearing a blue coat. She had a small brown suitcase." The officer nodded slowly. "And what is your relationship to her?" Daniel hesitated. "I met her a few days ago. She was alone at the subway station. I gave her a place to stay for the night." The man's eyebrows lifted. "You are not family?" "No," Daniel said quickly. "I just wanted to make sure she was safe." The officer sighed and filled out a report. "If she has been to any shelters or hospitals, her name should show up here. We get cases like this all the time. Some of them find their way back to parents. Some do not." Daniel leaned forward. "Can you check for me?" The officer typed for a few minutes, then turned the screen slightly. "There is one record that might fit. A girl named Lila Daniels was at the temporary shelter downtown 2 months ago. She left with her mother before social services could process them. We have not seen them since." "Daniels," Daniel repeated softly. "That must be her." The officer nodded. "If you want, I can give you the address of the shelter director. Maybe she knows more." Daniel thanked him and left. The shelter was a converted brick building tucked between a laundromat and a small grocery store. Its sign read, "Second Step Family Center." The air inside smelled faintly of soap and paper. A woman in her 50s greeted him at the door. Her name tag read Clara Ruiz. "Mr. Hart," she said after he introduced himself. "I remember that child. She was polite, quiet, always tried to help the younger ones. Her mother, Rosa, was struggling. She loved the girl. You could see that. But she was in trouble, addiction, debts, fear. She said she would come back when she got clean. The little one waited here every morning for 2 weeks." Daniel swallowed hard. "Do you know where Rosa is now?" Clara's expression softened. "We lost track of her. Last we heard, she was in a rehab center across the river, but we do not know if she finished the program." Daniel took a deep breath. "If I gave you my number, could you call me if she ever returns, or if the girl does?" "Of course," Clara said. "But, Mr. Hart, May I ask, why are you doing this? You do not owe them anything. Daniel looked around the small, crowded lobby-worn couches, drawings taped to the walls, a bulletin board filled with job listings and prayer notes. Maybe I do, he said quietly. Maybe all of us do. Clara smiled, the kind of smile that holds both sadness and gratitude. The world needs more people who think like that. When Daniel stepped outside again, the wind had picked up. Snow drifted across the sidewalk, swirling in small circles before vanishing. He stood there for a long time, thinking about what Clara had said. That evening, he returned to the park where he and Lila had last sat together. The benches were empty, but the pigeons were still there, pecking at the ground. Daniel bought a loaf of bread from the nearby stand and began scattering crumbs. As he did, a man in a worn coat approached. "You looking for that little girl again?" he asked. Daniel turned sharply. "You saw her? Couple of days ago," the man said. "She gave my dog half her sandwich. Said she was heading toward the river, to find someone named Rosa." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Did she say where exactly?" The man shook his head. "No, sir. Just that she was going to find her mom." Daniel thanked him, though the words barely reached his lips. He stood still for a moment, the city moving around him. Then he began to walk again, faster this time, following the road that led down toward the river. The night air grew sharper as he walked. His breath fogged in front of him, each step stirring memories, her laughter, her steady eyes, her quiet dignity. He did not know where the path would lead, but he knew one thing for certain: he would not stop looking. Somewhere out there, a little girl with a suitcase was walking through the cold, believing in the promise that things could get better. And for the first time, in a very long time, Daniel believed it too. The city lights shimmered on the river like broken stars, and he whispered to the wind, "I am coming, Lila. I will find you." One. The wind carried his voice forward, across the frozen water, as if the city itself had begun to listen. The riverfront was quiet that morning, covered in a thin mist that made the world look softer than it was. Daniel walked slowly along the path, his breath forming pale clouds in the air. The cold bit through his gloves, but he hardly noticed. He had spent most of the night awake, following every possible lead, every whisper that could lead him to her. Yet what drove him now was not worry alone, it was something gentler, a quiet need to see her safe again. He passed a line of benches near the frozen fountain. A small group of volunteers was handing out food and blankets to those who had slept by the river. The sight of kindness among strangers gave him a flicker of hope. When he approached, a woman in a red scarf smiled at him. "Looking to help, sir?" she asked. "Actually," Daniel said, "I am looking for someone." A little girl, 8 years old, dark hair and braids, blue coat, brown suitcase. The woman's smile faded slightly as she thought. "There was a child like that here yesterday morning," she said. "She was sitting near the benches, sharing her food with an older man and his dog. She did not ask for anything. She just gave what she had." Daniel's throat tightened. "Did she say where she was going?" The woman nodded toward the next block. "She asked about the women's shelter near the bridge. I told her to follow the blue sign." He thanked her and started walking quickly, his shoes crunching through patches of old snow. The street narrowed ahead, leading toward a small church building with a painted sign that read Street Helena Outreach Center. A line of people waited outside, holding paper cups of soup. Daniel scanned the crowd, his heart hammering in his chest. Then, near the end of the line, he saw her. Lila sat on the curb, her suitcase beside her, breaking a roll of bread in half to feed a stray dog. Her blue coat was dusted with snow, and her cheeks were pink from the cold. Despite the wind, she looked calm, the same quiet strength that had stopped him that first night in the subway. Daniel called her name softly, "Lila." She turned. When she saw him, her eyes widened not in fear, but in surprise. "You found me," she said. "I told you I would," Daniel replied. He knelt down so they were eye level. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "I was looking for my mom. Someone said she might be here." Daniel looked toward the shelter doors. "I can help you look," he said. "We will do it together." Lila hesitated. "You do not have to. You already helped me." "I know," Daniel said gently, "but I want to." She studied his face for a moment, and then smiled the first real smile he had seen from her. "Okay," she whispered. They stood and walked toward the entrance. The volunteer at the door stopped them. "We are full right now," she said kindly. "But if you are looking for someone, the staff inside might have records." Daniel nodded and waited as she went to call a supervisor. He looked down at Lila, who was staring through the glass door at the people inside, mothers holding children, women clutching coats too thin for the weather. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "They look tired," she said. "They are," Daniel answered, "but they are safe here. That matters." The volunteer returned a moment later. "You can go in," she said. "Talk to Mrs. Turner at the front desk. She might know something." Inside, the air was warmer, though heavy with the smell of coffee and detergent. Lila's small hand gripped Daniel's sleeve as they walked down the hall. Behind the counter, a woman with glasses looked up. "Yes?" she asked. Daniel explained why they were there, describing Rosa Daniels and her daughter. Mrs. Turner frowned slightly, flipping through a notebook. "Rosa Daniels," she repeated. "Yes, she was here last week. She is at a recovery center now, just a few blocks away. She left this morning for her final evaluation." Lila's breath caught. "She is here? She is really here?" Mrs. Turner smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart." She said she hoped her little girl was somewhere warm. Lila turned to Daniel, her eyes bright with something that looked like disbelief and hope all at once. "Can we go?" she asked. "Of course," he said. They left the shelter together, following the address Mrs. Turner had written down. The recovery center was a modest brick building surrounded by bare trees. As they approached, Lila slowed down. Her small hand tightened around his fingers. "What if she does not want to see me?" she asked. Daniel crouched down beside her. "Then we will still be glad she is safe," he said softly. "And if she does want to see you, then today will be the day she gets her second chance." Lila nodded. Her breath trembled as she whispered, "Second chances sound nice." "They are," Daniel said. "Sometimes they save us." The front doors opened automatically as they stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around them, smelling faintly of soap and lemon. Lila clutched her suitcase closer, her eyes darting across the hallway. A nurse came forward, recognizing the name on the paper in Daniel's hand. "Rosa Daniels?" she asked. "She is in the common room. Would you like me to tell her someone is here?" Lila shook her head quickly. "No," she said. "I want to see her first." Daniel looked down at her, his heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. She was trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. "Okay," he said. "You lead the way." "Oh." As they walked toward the common room, the faint sound of laughter drifted from down the hall. Daniel could see the outline of a woman sitting by the window, her head bent, sunlight touching her hair. He felt Lila's hand tighten in his, and he knew this was the moment, the one she had been waiting for, and the one he had been unknowingly walking toward since the night she had said, "My mom left without me." And as they reached the doorway, Lila whispered, "I think she came back." The common room was filled with soft light from the tall windows, the kind of light that makes everything look fragile and kind. The air smelled faintly of soap and mint tea. A few women sat together at a table, folding clean laundry. Others read quietly, their faces calm in a way that only comes after long storms. Lila stopped at the doorway, her suitcase resting beside her leg. Daniel stood just behind her, silent, letting her choose the moment. Across the room, a woman sat near the window, her head bowed over a cup of tea. Her hair, dark with streaks of gray, fell over her face, and her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cup. "That is her," Lila whispered. Her voice carried a mix of wonder and fear. Daniel looked at the woman and then back at Lila. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Lila nodded, though her fingers gripped the suitcase so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Then she took a step forward. The sound of her small shoes on the tile floor made the woman by the window look up. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. The woman's eyes widened, confusion flickering first, then disbelief, then a wave of emotion too deep for words. "Lila?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Lila nodded. "Hi, Mom." The cup in Rosa's hands rattled as she set it down. She stood up slowly, her body trembling, as if afraid the girl might disappear if she moved too fast. Is it really you? It is me, Lila said. I found you. Rosa took a step closer, then another, and finally fell to her knees in front of her daughter. She reached out, hesitating before touching her, as though asking permission. Lila's small hand moved first, resting on her mother's cheek. I thought I lost you, Rosa whispered. I was waiting, Lila replied. At the station, I thought you would come back. Rosa closed her eyes. Tears slid down her face, slow and soundless. I wanted to. I was so sick, baby. I did not want you to see me like that. I thought leaving would protect you, but it just broke me. Lila looked down at her mother's hands. They were rough, marked by work and time. She held them carefully, as if they were glass. I am not mad, she said. I just missed you. Daniel stood back, feeling his throat tighten. The room around them seemed to fade, the sound of voices turning into a distant hum. He watched the way Rosa clung to her daughter, the way Lila leaned into her without fear. It was a moment built on forgiveness, the kind that did not need to be spoken aloud. After a long silence, Rosa looked up and noticed him for the first time. Who are you? She asked softly. Lila turned to him. This is Daniel. He helped me. He found you. Rosa's eyes filled again. She stood and reached out a shaking hand. Thank you, she said. I do not know what would have happened if she had not found someone kind. Daniel took her hand gently. She is the brave one, he said. She never stopped believing you would come back. Rosa smiled weakly. She has always been stronger than me. They sat together at the table near the window. The nurse brought more tea, and for a few minutes, the three of them simply existed in that rare peace where time slows down. Lila told her mother about the hotel, the park, and the blue scarf Daniel had given her. Rosa listened, her hand resting over Lila's, nodding with quiet pride and sorrow. You took care of yourself, Rosa said finally. I am so proud of you. Lila smiled, her eyes shining. I had help, she said, and I did not give up. Daniel looked away, pretending to watch the snow falling outside. He felt both full and empty at the same time. He had done what he came to do. He had kept his promise. But now that they were together again, a small ache began to grow in his chest, the ache of letting go. After a while, Rosa turned to him. You could stay for lunch, she said gently. You do not have to leave. Daniel hesitated. I will stay for a little while, he said. They ate simple food, soup and bread, and talked about small things. The weather, the taste of the tea, the sound of trains that passed the center each hour. Lila laughed once, a clear, light sound that made both adults smile. When lunch ended, Rosa looked out the window. They told me I might be released soon, she said. They think I am ready to start over. That is good, Daniel said. Second chances are real. Rosa nodded, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of yarn, red, frayed, tied in a loop. This was from her old bracelet, she said. I kept it. It reminded me to fight my way back. Lila reached out her hand. You can keep it, she said softly. It worked. Rosa smiled through her tears and slipped it back into her pocket. Then I will. Outside, the snow began to melt, leaving the first glints of sunlight on the window glass. Lila leaned against her mother's shoulder, her eyes half closed, content in a way Daniel had never seen. He stood up quietly, knowing it was time. I will come back tomorrow, he said. Lila looked up. Promise? I promise, Daniel said. You have both come too far to be left alone now. Rosa nodded, her expression full of gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel smiled, though his voice caught in his throat. You do not need to thank me, he said. You both saved each other. He stepped out into the hallway, the sound of their laughter following him like a soft echo. The air outside was sharp and clear, and for the first time in years, he felt as if the world had given something back, something whole and quiet and good. The next morning arrived with the first clear sunlight the city had seen in weeks. Daniel walked to the recovery center early, carrying 2 paper cups of hot chocolate and a small bag of pastries. The snow had melted into thin ribbons of water that ran along the sidewalks, and every step felt lighter than it had in days. When he reached the front desk, the nurse greeted him warmly. They are in the garden, she said. Your little friend has been up since dawn. Daniel thanked her and followed the hallway toward the courtyard. The garden was simple, a few benches, bare trees, and a patch of grass just beginning to thaw. In the middle of it, Lila sat on a wooden bench, feeding crumbs to a pair of sparrows. Her mother, Rosa, was beside her, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Lila looked up when she saw him. "You came back," she said, smiling. "I promised I would," Daniel replied. He handed her one of the hot chocolates. "It is still warm." She took it carefully, both hands around the cup. "It smells nice," she said. Rosa smiled at him. "You did not have to bring anything." "I wanted to," Daniel said. "It feels good to bring something that is not made of money." They sat together in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sparrows hop across the frozen ground. The quiet was peaceful, the kind that did not need to be filled. After a while, Lila asked, "Did you ever feed birds before?" Daniel thought for a moment. "No," he said. "I used to walk past them. I never stopped long enough." "You should stop sometimes," Lila said. "They are funny. They argue, then they share again." He chuckled softly. "You are right. Maybe people could learn something from them." Rosa watched the exchange with a faint smile. Her face looked different that morning, tired, yes, but clear, as if a heavy fog had finally lifted. "She has that effect on people," she said quietly. "I can see that," Daniel replied. "She changes the air around her." Lila tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means you make the world softer," Daniel said. Lila considered this seriously, then nodded. "That sounds good." Rosa looked down at her hands. "Mr. Hart, I do not know how to thank you for what you did," she said. "Most people would have walked away." Daniel shook his head. "I have walked away from too many things. This time, I did not want to." Rosa's eyes glistened. "You gave her more than safety. You gave her faith that kindness still exists." Daniel looked at Lila, who was now breaking her pastry in half to share with her mother. "She gave me that too," he said softly. The nurse stepped outside to call Rosa in for her session, leaving Daniel and Lila alone on the bench. The sunlight fell across the girl's face, catching the strands of her hair like thin gold threads. She leaned her head against the backrest and sighed. "She looks better now," Lila said. "She smiles again." "Ugh," Daniel nodded. "She is healing, and so are you." Lila looked at him curiously. "Do grown-ups heal too?" "Sometimes," he said. "When they finally stop pretending they do not need to." She smiled faintly. "You talk like Grandma." "That is a compliment," he said, smiling back. For a while they said nothing. The city noise was faint in the distance, a hum that belonged to another world. In this small courtyard, time moved slower. Daniel realized that it had been a long time since he had felt stillness without loneliness. "Can I ask you something?" Lila said suddenly. "Of course," he replied. "What did you want to be when you were little?" Daniel leaned back and thought. "I wanted to be an architect," he said. "I liked the idea of building something that would last." She nodded seriously. "You built a company instead." "Yes," he said. "But maybe I forgot how to build people." Lila's eyes softened. "You are learning again." Her words landed like a quiet truth. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Something small but real, like the first bud breaking through frozen soil. When Rosa returned, she looked lighter. "They say I can leave in a few days," she said. "They found a small apartment for us through a charity program." "That is wonderful," Daniel said, standing. "You deserve a fresh start." Rosa hesitated. "We would not have one without you." "Maybe you would," Daniel said. "You just needed someone to remind you that you could." Lila tugged at his sleeve. "Will we still see you?" Daniel looked down at her, at the wide hope in her eyes. "Yes," he said firmly. "You cannot get rid of me that easily." She giggled. "Good." They walked together back inside. The hallway was filled with morning light now, and the air smelled of freshly brewed coffee. Daniel realized that the ache he had carried for so long, the hollow part of his life that money never filled, had begun to fade. In its place was something simpler, purpose. Before leaving, he handed Rosa a small envelope. "This is not charity," he said quickly when she tried to refuse. "It is a start. A few months of rent, some groceries, maybe new shoes for her." Rosa accepted it with trembling hands. "We will pay you back," she said. "You already have," Daniel replied. Outside, The streets glistened under the sunlight, and for the first time in years, Daniel did not hurry. He walked slowly, breathing in the cold air, carrying with him the quiet laughter that still echoed from that little courtyard, a sound that felt more valuable than any fortune he had ever made. And somewhere deep inside, he understood what Lila had been teaching him all along. True wealth is not measured in what a person keeps, but in what they are finally willing to give. The following week brought a stretch of calm days that felt almost unreal after so many restless nights. The city had begun to thaw. Patches of grass showed through the melting snow, and the river carried small pieces of ice downstream. Glittering in the afternoon Sunday, Daniel found himself visiting Rosa and Lila every day. Each time, he came with something simple, a bag of groceries, a few books, or hot soup from a nearby diner. He never stayed too long, but he always stayed long enough to listen. Rosa and Lila had moved into their new apartment, a small one-bedroom space on the east side of town. The walls were still bare, and the floor creaked with every step, but it was warm, and it smelled faintly of soap and new beginnings. Lila had drawn small pictures on scraps of paper and taped them to the refrigerator, smiling faces, birds, hearts, and one sketch of a man with a briefcase standing beside a little girl holding a suitcase. Underneath, she had written in big, uneven letters, "We are home now." When Daniel arrived that afternoon, Lila opened the door with a bright smile. "You are here," she said. "Of course," Daniel replied. "I brought you something." He held out a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. Lila tore it open carefully, as if afraid to damage the paper. Inside was a stack of blank notebooks and a set of colored pencils. Her eyes lit up. "For me?" "Yes," Daniel said. "You can draw your own stories now." She hugged the box to her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. Rosa came from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "You are spoiling her," she said, smiling. "Then I am doing something right," Daniel said. They sat at the small kitchen table. Rosa poured tea into chipped mugs, and the scent of lemon filled the air. The afternoon sun filtered through the window, warming the faded curtains. It was quiet, but the kind of quiet that feels full instead of empty. Lila spread her notebooks out and began drawing, humming under her breath. Daniel watched her for a moment, then turned to Rosa. "How are you holding up?" he asked. She hesitated. "Better," she said. "The program still checks in on me twice a week. I go to meetings. I work part-time at the bakery around the corner. It is not much, but it keeps me busy." Daniel nodded. "That sounds good. Keeping busy is good." Rosa smiled faintly. "It helps me stay honest with myself, mostly." She looked at him and added, "I want you to know something, Mr. Hart. I do not take your help for granted. You gave us more than food or shelter. You gave us time, the kind of time we needed to find our feet again." Daniel looked down at his tea. "You did the hard part," he said quietly. "You came back." Rosa shook her head. "No, she came back to me. I just followed her courage." Daniel smiled at that. The truth of it hung in the air between them like a light that did not need to be explained. Lila looked up from her drawing. "Can I show you something?" she asked. She held up her notebook. On the first page, she had drawn 3 figures standing under a bright yellow sun: her mother, herself, and Daniel. Beneath it, she had written in careful letters, "Second chances." Daniel stared at the page for a long time. His throat tightened. "That is beautiful," he said. "Why did you call it that?" "Because that is what we got," she said simply. "You said second chances save people." He nodded slowly. "They do, and they also save the people who give them." Rosa looked at him thoughtfully. "You sound like a man who has been thinking about his own second chance." Daniel smiled softly. "Maybe I have. Maybe this is mine." Lila grinned. "Then you have to do something good with it." He chuckled. "Yes, I suppose I do." Later, as the sun began to set, Daniel stood by the window while Lila finished her drawing. The street below glowed with golden light, and the air carried the faint hum of traffic. He turned to Rosa. "I have been thinking about starting something," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Something like what?" "A foundation," Daniel said. "A place for families like yours, mothers and children who need a safe home. A fresh start. Not just charity, but real help. Jobs, education, stability." Rosa's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "I have the resources," Daniel said. And the time. I used to build buildings that reached the sky. Maybe it is time to build something that reaches hearts instead. Lila looked up, her eyes shining. Can I help? You already are, Daniel said. The girl giggled. Then, we are partners. Partners it is, Daniel replied. Rosa's smile trembled, but she nodded. That sounds like something the world needs. When Daniel left that evening, the air outside was cool but not bitter. The city lights flickered on one by one, and for the first time, he did not see them as cold symbols of success. They looked like beacons, like signs pointing towards something worth building. As he walked to his car, he thought about the word home. He had spent his life surrounded by houses, penthouses, and hotel suites, but none of them had ever felt like that small apartment. Inside those thin walls lived a mother learning to forgive herself, a child brave enough to love again, and a man who had finally remembered what kindness felt like. He smiled to himself, the kind of smile that starts deep inside and rises slowly. Second chances, he realized, were not gifts you received. They were bridges you built, one act of compassion at a time. A week after that conversation, Daniel sat at his office desk surrounded by papers, notes, and printed photographs of community centers across the city. For years, this desk had been a place of numbers and contracts, of deals signed and empires expanded. But now, it was covered with sketches of floor plans, lists of names, and handwritten ideas titled The Second Chances Foundation. The idea had grown quietly in him, like a seed waiting for the right season. He no longer wanted to build something that only carried his name. He wanted to build something that carried meaning. And every time he hesitated, he pictured Lila's small drawing, 3 people standing under a yellow sun, and he found the courage to keep going. Outside his window, the late afternoon sky was soft and gold. He turned from the papers and called the number he had written on a sticky note. Clara Ruiz, Second Step Family Center. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Hart, she said warmly, I did not expect to hear from you so soon. I wanted to thank you again, Daniel said. And I wanted to ask for your help. I am putting together something new, a foundation to support families like the ones you work with. It will offer housing, counseling, and job programs. I would like you to be part of it. There was a pause on the line, then Clara said, That sounds like something this city needs. Count me in. By the end of the call, Daniel had a list of potential locations and partners. When he hung up, he leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. This was not a business deal. It was something closer to redemption. That evening, he visited Rosa and Lila again. The apartment smelled like warm bread. Rosa had been baking for her new job at the bakery and proudly offered him a loaf wrapped in a clean towel. It is not perfect, she said shyly, but it is mine. Daniel smiled. That makes it better than perfect. Lila ran to the table, holding one of her new notebooks. I drew something, she said, opening to a page. It showed a tall building with open doors, a heart on the roof, and people of all colors standing inside. Above it, she had written, The Home for Second Chances. Daniel stared at the drawing. That is exactly what I want to build, he said. Then you have to make it real, Lila said with certainty. Grandma used to say that drawings are wishes with work added. He laughed softly. Then I suppose I have work to do. Rosa listened quietly. You are really doing this, aren't you? Yes, Daniel said. And I want you both to help me. You know better than anyone what people need to feel safe again. Rosa looked at her hands, uncertain. I do not know if I can help with something that big. You already have, Daniel said gently. You reminded me what it means to start over. The next morning, he began the process. He called architects, social workers, and city planners. He reached out to investors, not for profit this time, but for purpose. The reactions surprised him. Many of the people he contacted, hard business minds, men and women who rarely looked up from their spreadsheets, paused to listen when he spoke about compassion, dignity, and rebuilding lives. Within a week, he had enough pledges to buy an old warehouse by the river. The building had once been a textile factory, empty for years, its windows cracked and its walls covered in graffiti. But when Daniel walked through it with the architect, he saw something more. He saw wide halls where children could play, rooms filled with light where families could eat together, and spaces where people could heal without shame. "This will be the heart of it," Daniel said, his voice steady. "Not just shelter, but belonging." The architect nodded, taking notes. "And the name?" Daniel smiled. "The Second Chance's Home." That evening, he returned to Rosa's apartment to share the news. Lila greeted him at the door, her hands dusted with flour. "We made cookies," she announced proudly. Rosa smiled behind her. "She insisted we bake something for the people who helped us. She said giving thanks makes the world bigger." Daniel laughed. "Then your world must be growing fast." They sat together at the kitchen table again, sharing cookies and tea. Daniel told them about the warehouse and the plans. Lila listened with shining eyes, interrupting only to ask, "Can we visit it when it is ready?" "Not just visit," Daniel said. "I want you to help me cut the ribbon when it opens." She clapped her hands. "Like a ceremony?" "Yes," he said. "A beginning." Rosa's voice softened. "You know, Daniel, I used to think people like you lived in another world. But maybe the worlds are not so far apart after all." "They never were," he said quietly. "We just stopped looking for the bridges." When he left that night, the city lights reflected on the wet pavement. The air carried the smell of fresh rain and hope. He walked slower than usual, feeling every sound, every flicker of life around him. For the first time in years, he was not chasing success. He was walking toward meaning, and as he reached his car, he realized something simple but powerful. Lila's story was no longer just hers. It was theirs, and soon, it would belong to others too. Families who would walk through those new doors, holding on to whatever hope they had left, would find what he had found. Proof that compassion could rebuild even the most broken parts of a life. The warehouse by the river no longer looked abandoned. Within weeks, the cracked walls were replaced with clean white bricks, and tall windows filled the rooms with sunlight. Workers carried lumber, electricians ran cables, and the air smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. Daniel walked through the halls each morning with his sleeves rolled up, greeting everyone by name. He no longer wore suits. Instead, he wore work boots and a faded gray sweater, the kind of clothes that could get dirty without apology. He had named the building the Second Chance's Home, just as Lila had written in her drawing. Above the entrance, in soft gold letters, the name curved like a promise. It was no longer just a project, it was becoming a heartbeat. Lila and Rosa visited every few days. Lila loved to help, even if her help mostly meant offering cookies to the workers or drawing chalk hearts on the concrete floor. Rosa assisted in the kitchen area, helping design the space where mothers could cook for their families. She said the smell of warm bread was the fastest way to make a building feel like home. On one bright morning, Daniel stood outside with Lila, looking at the new playground that was being installed in the back lot. The swings creaked softly in the wind, and sunlight bounced off the river beyond the fence. "It is almost ready," Daniel said. Lila squinted up at the colorful slide. "It looks happy," she said. "It should," Daniel replied. "This place is going to hold a lot of happiness." Lila tilted her head. "Do you think people will come?" "They will," Daniel said with quiet certainty. "People always come when there is kindness waiting." She smiled. "Then it will be full." Later that afternoon, Rosa joined them. Her face looked healthier now, her eyes clear and focused. She walked slowly through the hall, touching the smooth walls as if memorizing the feeling. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "You have turned something broken into something alive." Daniel nodded. "So have you." Rosa smiled, though a shadow crossed her face. "I have been thinking about what happens next. I want to do more here. I want to help other mothers who come through those doors." You would be perfect for that," Daniel said. "You understand what they are carrying." Rosa looked down at her hands. "Do you think they will listen to me?" "They will listen," Daniel said gently, "because you speak from truth, not from pity." Lila tugged on her mother's sleeve. "You could teach them how to bake." Rosa laughed softly. "Maybe I will." When the construction finally finished, the building glowed with warmth. The halls were filled with soft light, the walls painted in gentle colors, blue for calm, yellow for hope. The rooms smelled of fresh paint, bread, and new beginnings. Volunteers hung curtains and placed books on shelves. The opening ceremony was set for a Saturday morning. Daniel invited the workers, the families from local shelters, and the people who had donated to the project. But the first names on the guest list were Rosa and Lila. The night before the ceremony, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, the same one that had once felt so empty. On the table beside him lay the napkin drawing. Lila had left behind months ago 2 stick figures standing under falling snow. He had framed it now, placing it beside a photograph of his late wife. For the first time, he felt that both belonged there, side by side. He thought about how strange life was. One act of compassion, one small decision to stop instead of walk past had changed everything. The man who had once measured worth by money now found value in moments of grace. He had not saved the girl. She had saved him. The next morning dawned bright and clear. The courtyard outside the new center was decorated with balloons and ribbons. Volunteers arranged tables of food and flowers. The sign above the entrance shimmered in the sunlight. The second chance is home. Rosa arrived early, wearing a simple blue dress. She looked proud but nervous. "I have not spoken in front of people before," she said. "You will do fine," Daniel said. "Just speak from the heart." Lila stood beside them, holding a small pair of scissors tied with a red ribbon. "Are we really cutting it together?" she asked. "All 3 of us," Daniel said. "Partners, remember?" She nodded, her eyes shining. When the crowd gathered, Daniel stepped forward to speak. His voice was calm, but each word carried weight. "This building began as a dream," he said, "but it became real because of one small act of kindness. A child reminded me that every person deserves a place to belong. Today, this home belongs to everyone who needs a new beginning." He looked at Lila and Rosa, then added softly, "Second chances are not about forgetting the past. They are about believing that the future is still worth building." The crowd applauded. Rosa wiped her eyes, and Lila grinned, her small hand gripping the scissors tightly. Together, the 3 of them cut the red ribbon. The sound of cheers filled the air as the doors opened for the first families waiting outside. Children ran in first, their laughter echoing down the hallways. Mothers followed, some with tears, some with disbelief. Daniel watched them with quiet awe. He saw what hope looked like when it was no longer a word but a place. Lila turned to him. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "We did it." As the morning light filled the building, Daniel felt something he had not known: he was still capable of peace. Not the kind that comes from success, but the kind that comes when the heart finally finds its purpose. The second chance's home was alive, and so was he. The first week after the grand opening of the second chance's home felt like a new kind of sunrise for everyone involved. Families began to move in slowly, mothers with tired eyes and children clutching worn toys, fathers who had been searching for steady work, and young people who simply needed a place to start over. Each person carried a story, and within the walls of the new home, those stories began to breathe again. Daniel spent most of his days there, learning each name, listening more than he spoke. He had stopped wearing the air of a businessman long ago. Instead, he moved through the halls like a quiet guardian, making sure the heaters worked, the pantry stayed full, and the people felt seen. He discovered that the smallest gestures, a warm meal, a repaired light, a gentle conversation, were the ones that mattered most. Lila became the center's unofficial welcome ambassador. Every afternoon after school, she would rush in with her backpack bouncing, checking the bulletin board for new families. She liked to draw small welcome notes and tape them to the doors of new residents. Her favorite read, "You are safe here. We are glad you came." One cold afternoon, Daniel found her sitting cross-legged on the floor near the play area, helping a little boy build a tower of colorful blocks. "You have a gift for this," Daniel said, watching her patience as the boy knocked down the tower for the 5th time. Lila grinned. "He likes the sound it makes when it falls. He says it is like thunder." "Ugh," Daniel laughed. "Then he must be an artist too." Lila shrugged. "Maybe. But he said he never had toys before, so now he just wants to hear them crash and start over." Her words made Daniel pause. He realized that even in play, the spirit of rebuilding lived here. Each person in this building was learning how to start again, and Lila, without knowing it, was teaching them how to do it with joy instead of fear. Later that evening, Rosa joined Daniel in the office that had once been an old storage room. She brought a tray of warm bread rolls from the kitchen. The air smelled of cinnamon and flour. "We had extra from dinner," she said. "I thought you might want one." He smiled. You are turning this place into something beautiful, Rosa. She sat across from him. It is not just me. The people here, they are changing each other. It feels like family. Daniel nodded. That is exactly what I hoped it would be. Rosa hesitated for a moment before speaking again. There is something I have been thinking about. You built this place for people like me, but you also built it for yourself. I can see that. You look lighter now. He looked down at the half-eaten roll in his hand. Maybe I do. For a long time, I thought success was about having everything. Now I think it is about giving something that lasts after you are gone. Rosa smiled gently. Then you finally understand what most people spend a lifetime chasing. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from the hallway. Lila and the children were playing tag, their voices rising and falling like music. Rosa turned toward the sound, her eyes soft. She is happy again, she said quietly. I never thought I would see that. Daniel followed her gaze. You brought her back to it, he said. No, Rosa whispered. You did. No. The next day, Daniel arranged a small community meeting in the main hall. He stood in front of the residents, flanked by Rosa and Lila. This home belongs to all of you, he said. We will build it together, share responsibilities, make decisions, and take care of one another. Kindness will be our rule here. A woman in the front row raised her hand. And what if someone breaks the rule? Daniel smiled. Then we remind them why it matters. The crowd nodded. There was something powerful about the simplicity of his words. In that moment, the Second Chances home became more than a shelter. It became a community of people who believed in each other. After the meeting, Daniel stepped outside to the courtyard. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of bread and laughter. Lila joined him, holding her notebook. I wrote something, she said. Can I hear it? Daniel asked. She nodded and opened the notebook. Her handwriting was big and uneven, but every word was clear. It says, when people lose their way, they just need one small light. Sometimes that light is another person. Daniel looked at her, his throat tight. That is beautiful, Lila. Where did you learn that? She smiled. From you. He shook his head gently. No, from you. I just followed it. They stood together in silence, watching the sun dip behind the river. The windows of the building glowed gold, reflecting the last light of day. Inside those walls, people were laughing, cooking, rebuilding, proof that goodness could take root anywhere, even in places once forgotten. Rosa came out a few minutes later, wrapping her coat tightly. We are heading home, she said. You should rest too. You have been here since sunrise. Daniel smiled. I will, but I like staying to watch the lights come on. She nodded knowingly. They remind you of something, don't they? Yes, he said softly. They remind me that darkness never wins if someone keeps the light burning. As Rosa and Lila walked away, Daniel turned back toward the glowing building. The wind brushed against his face, cool but gentle, and he realized that he no longer felt alone in the city that once felt too large. He had found his place not in skyscrapers or boardrooms, but here, among those who had once been invisible. And as night settled, the lights inside the Second Chances home shone like stars that refused to fade, carrying with them the quiet truth that compassion, once shared, never really ends. Winter began to loosen its hold on the city, and with spring came the kind of air that felt like forgiveness. The snow had melted into puddles that reflected the wide sky, and the trees by the river were beginning to bud again. Inside the Second Chances home, laughter filled the hallways more often than silence. Children ran through the courtyard chasing each other, their shoes splashing through shallow pools of rainwater, while the older residents planted small gardens along the fence. The building that had once smelled of sawdust and paint now carried the scent of soup, bread, and life. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Rosa stir a pot on the stove while a group of women helped her prepare dinner for everyone. Her face was calm, focused, the soft rhythm of movement in her hands, steady and sure. Lila sat at one of the tables with crayons scattered around her, drawing a picture of flowers blooming next to a tall building that looked suspiciously like the home itself. When Rosa noticed him standing there, she smiled. You should sit, she said. You work more than anyone here. Daniel chuckled. You sound like someone who has been talking to the staff. I do, she said laughing. They worry you forget to eat. He nodded toward the bubbling pot. Smells like you are making enough for an army. Rosa stirred the soup gently. Maybe I am. Everyone here knows what it feels like to go hungry. No one should ever feel that again. He looked at her, seeing how much she had changed. There was light in her now, steady, patient light. "You are the heart of this place," he said quietly. Rosa paused, then smiled. "You are wrong," she said softly. "She is." She nodded toward Lila, who was now explaining her drawing to two younger children. Daniel followed her gaze and smiled. "You are right," he said. "She always has been." That evening, after dinner, Daniel walked out to the small garden behind the building. The air was cool, carrying the sound of laughter from inside. The river glimmered under the streetlights, and he found himself thinking about his wife again, the way she used to dream of opening a school or a shelter before her illness took her too soon. He had built towers of glass and steel instead. Now, for the first time, he felt he had finally done something she would have been proud of. He was still standing there when Lila came out, wearing her favorite blue coat, even though it was not that cold anymore. "Mom said you were hiding," she said, walking toward him. Daniel smiled. "I was thinking." She squinted at him. "About work?" "About life," he said, "and about how you have changed mine." She frowned in confusion. "Me? I did not do anything." He knelt down to her height, looking her in the eyes. "You did everything," he said softly. "You reminded me what it means to care again. You reminded me that people can still be good." Lila thought for a moment, then smiled. "Grandma used to say the world needs people who remember good things." "She was a very wise woman," Daniel said. "She would have liked you," Lila said, tugging at the hem of his coat. "I hope so," he replied. "Because I like her granddaughter very much." Lila grinned. "You should come to the garden tomorrow morning. We are planting flowers. Mom says they are called marigolds. They are for remembering people." "I will be here," Daniel promised. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Volunteers gathered in the garden with gloves and shovels, while the children carried small potted plants. Lila directed everyone with the confidence of someone twice her age, showing them where each flower should go. Rosa handed out lemonade and smiled every time she caught Daniel watching them. When the last marigold was planted, Lila stood in front of the row of bright orange blossoms, her face glowing with pride. "Do you like them?" she asked Daniel. "They are perfect," he said. "They are for people who need to be remembered," she said. "I planted one for my grandma, one for Mom, and one for you." Daniel blinked. "From me?" She nodded seriously. "For when you forget to rest or smile, you can come look at it and remember." He felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of gratitude and something deeper, harder to name. "Thank you, Lila," he said quietly. "I will remember." As the day went on, more people arrived, new families carrying small suitcases, nervous faces softening as they stepped through the doors of the Second Chance's home. Rosa greeted each one with warmth, while Lila handed out cookies she had baked the night before. Daniel watched the way they worked together, mother and daughter, kindness and courage, and he realized that what had begun as one small act had become a chain of miracles. That evening, after the sun set, he stood once again in the courtyard. The marigolds glowed softly in the dim light, their petals bright even against the dark soil. The windows of the building shimmered with warmth. Inside, voices rose in laughter and song. For the first time in a long time, Daniel understood that love was not a single grand gesture, it was hundreds of small ones stitched together, day by day. It was a cup of soup, a shared smile, a child's drawing taped to a refrigerator. He looked up at the glowing sign that read "The Second Chance's Home," and whispered a quiet prayer, not for success, but for the strength to keep the light burning. Behind him, he heard Lila's voice call out softly, "Good night, Mr. Daniel." He turned and smiled. "Good night, Lila. Sleep well." And as he watched her disappear into the building, he realized that the world, for all its cruelty, still had a chance to heal one small act of kindness at a time. Spring deepened into early summer, and the city changed its rhythm. The river no longer carried ice. Instead, it shimmered beneath the sun like a sheet of glass. The Second Chance's home had become a living heartbeat within that rhythm. The once empty halls were now alive with the sounds of footsteps, laughter, and music. What had started as a vision had turned into a small world where broken stories could find their next chapters. Daniel spent every morning walking the perimeter of the building, greeting the residents and volunteers. He knew every name by heart now. Mrs. Alvarez, who painted murals on the dining room walls. Jamal, the teenager who taught younger children to read, and Lila, of course his smallest but bravest teacher who ran through the courtyard every day after school, leaving trails of chalk hearts wherever she went. That morning, he found her sitting under the old oak tree behind the building, sketching in her notebook. The marigolds she had planted months ago were blooming in thick, bright clusters. The air smelled faintly of earth and rain. "Good morning," Daniel said as he approached. She looked up, smiling. "You are late." "I stopped by the bakery," he said, holding up a small paper bag. "Your mother insisted I bring breakfast." Lila giggled. "Mom says you forget to eat again." She is right," he said. "I forget everything except this place." She flipped her notebook around to show him her drawing. It was a picture of the home, surrounded by flowers, with people waving from the windows. Above it, in uneven but careful letters, she had written, "This is where light lives." Daniel stared at it for a long time, his throat tightening. "That is beautiful," he said quietly. "You have a way of seeing the truth," Lila shrugged. "I just draw what is real." A soft breeze moved through the branches above them. Daniel sat beside her on the bench, opening the paper bag. "I have muffins," he said. "Blueberry." She accepted one with both hands. "Do you think this place will last forever?" she asked between small bites. Daniel considered the question carefully. "I hope so," he said. "But forever is not something we can promise. What matters is that it lasts long enough to change lives and that the people who leave here take a piece of its kindness with them." Lila looked at him thoughtfully. "Then maybe it will last forever," she said. "Just in a different way." He smiled. "You might be right." That afternoon, the center held its first community festival. Tables lined the courtyard, covered in homemade food and colorful crafts. There was music, an old guitar played by one of the residents, and children ran in circles, faces painted with bright stars and butterflies. Rosa managed the food table, serving soup and bread with a smile that never faded. When Daniel stepped up to the microphone to welcome everyone, his voice carried easily over the hum of conversation. "This home began as a dream," he said. "But today, it is proof of what people can do when they choose compassion over fear. Every person here is part of that story." The crowd applauded, and someone shouted, "Speech!" Daniel laughed softly. "You are already living the speech," he said. "Look around. This is what second chances look like." Later, as the sun began to set, Lila stood beside him at the edge of the courtyard, watching the golden light spill across the garden. "It looks like the sky is saying thank you," she whispered. Daniel glanced down at her. "Maybe it is." "Do you ever think about the night you met me?" she asked. "When you were in the subway?" "Every day," Daniel said. "That was the moment everything changed." Lila nodded slowly. "I think about it too. I think maybe God was whispering to both of us that night." Daniel looked out at the people gathered, their laughter drifting through the air. "If that is true," he said softly, "then I am still listening." As evening fell, the festival lights flickered on. Strings of golden bulbs hung across the courtyard, reflecting off the river beyond. Rosa came over and handed Daniel a cup of warm tea. "You did well today," she said. He smiled. "So did you. You turned this place into a home." Rosa looked around, her eyes full of quiet pride. "No," she said. "We all did." The three of them stood there for a while, Daniel, Rosa, and Lila, watching families dance beneath the lights. There was music, there was laughter, and for a moment, time felt like it had stopped to breathe with them. When the music slowed, Daniel turned to Lila. "It is getting late," he said. "You should head home soon." She shook her head. "Can we stay a little longer? I want to see the stars come out." He hesitated, then nodded. "A little longer." They stood in silence as the first stars appeared, faint but clear. Lila pointed up. "Look," she said. "There are more every time you wait." 0. Daniel followed her gaze. "That is how hope works too," he said. "You do not see it at first, but it is always there, waiting to shine." Lila smiled, leaning against his side. "Then we have a lot of hope tonight." He looked down at her and felt an overwhelming peace, a sense that life had finally come full circle. The man who had once measured success in towers now measured it in smiles and stars. As they watched the night deepen, Daniel realized that the Second Chances home had not just changed the lives of those who entered it, it had rewritten his own. And standing beneath that sky filled with quiet light, he understood that love, once found, never truly leaves. It simply finds new ways to stay. Summer settled into the city like a soft hum, warm and patient. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and rain on hot pavement. The Second Chances home was thriving, its once empty rooms now filled with the rhythm of everyday life. Children's laughter echoed down the halls in the morning, and the sound of music drifted from the common room at night. It was no longer just a place to stay, it had become a place to belong. Daniel sat on a bench near the garden, a notebook open in his lap. The marigolds that Lila had planted months ago were now tall and bright, swaying gently in the summer breeze. He wrote down notes about new programs, a scholarship fund for the children, a small library for the adults, and weekend workshops for job training. He had spent most of his career making lists of profits and expenses. Now, every list he made carried the quiet weight of purpose. Rosa walked toward him, her hands dusted with flour from baking. "You are working again," she said with a teasing smile. He looked up. "Old habits," he said, smiling back. "But this is the kind of work I never get tired of." She sat down beside him, brushing crumbs from her apron. "We are planning something special tonight," she said. "A celebration dinner. The residents want to thank you for what you have done." Daniel shook his head gently. "They do not owe me thanks. This place exists because of all of you." Rosa's eyes softened. "You gave us the first brick," she said. "We just built around it." Before Daniel could reply, the front door opened and Lila came running out, her braids bouncing as she waved a folded piece of paper. "I got it," she shouted, breathless with excitement. Rosa stood. "What did you get, sweetheart?" Lila held up the paper proudly. "My school picked my essay for the city contest. They are going to publish it." Daniel smiled. "That is wonderful, Lila. What did you write about?" She grinned. "About kindness. About the night I met you." Rosa covered her mouth, her eyes shining. "Oh, Lila," she whispered. Daniel took the paper gently, unfolding it. The handwriting was neat and careful, every letter pressed with purpose. The title read, "The Night Kindness Found Me." He began to read aloud, his voice steady but soft. "I was waiting in a subway station when my mother did not come back. I was scared, but then a man stopped. He did not know me, but he helped me. He gave me warmth, food, and hope. He reminded me that the world still has good people. Kindness does not need to be big, it just needs to be true. And sometimes, one act of kindness can turn into a whole new life." When he finished, there was silence between them except for the soft sound of wind moving through the marigolds. Daniel folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "That is the most beautiful thing I have ever read," he said. Lila looked up at him. "It is all true," she said. "And you taught me that kindness grows when you share it." Daniel felt his throat tighten, but he smiled. "You taught me that too." That evening, the residents gathered in the courtyard under strings of glowing lights. The tables were covered with dishes, soups, breads, and pies, each made by someone who had once come here with nothing. The air was filled with laughter and the smell of cinnamon and roasted vegetables. Rosa stood beside Daniel, as everyone took their seats. "Do you remember when this courtyard was empty?" she asked. "I remember," he said. "I remember when everything was empty." "Not anymore," Rosa said, looking around. "Now it is full." Daniel looked at her and nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "It is full." After dinner, Lila climbed onto one of the benches, holding her essay in her hands. "Can I read it to everyone?" she asked. The crowd cheered, encouraging her. Daniel sat quietly, watching as she began to read. Her small voice carried across the courtyard, steady and strong. People listened with tears in their eyes, nodding at every word. When she finished, the applause was long and warm. Rosa hugged her tightly, and Daniel felt something inside him loosen the last remnant of the man he used to be, the one who thought he could live without connection. Later, as the celebration faded into quiet conversation and the sky turned deep blue, Lila came to sit beside him again. "Do you think my essay will help people?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "It already has." She smiled. "Then I want to write more, Stories about people who get second chances. You should, he said. Stories like that make the world softer. She leaned against his arm. You will be in all of them, she said sleepily. Daniel looked out at the courtyard, the glowing lights, the laughter, the people who had found their way back to hope, and whispered, Then I will be honored. When the night finally grew quiet, the marigolds swayed gently under the stars. The laughter had faded, but the warmth remained. Daniel stayed there for a while, letting the stillness sink in. He realized that kindness was not a single act that ended when it was done. It was a ripple, a wave that moved outward, touching people he might never meet, changing lives he would never see. And as he looked toward the window where Rosa and Lila stood, smiling back at him, he knew that the world, even in its imperfection, had offered him something rare and priceless, a second chance to love, and to be loved in return. The days after the celebration felt slower, softer, as if the world itself had paused to breathe. The warmth of summer lingered in the air, and sunlight spilled through the windows of the Second Chance's home like a quiet blessing. Every morning, the sound of laughter rose from the kitchen as Rosa and a few residents prepared breakfast. Children chased each other down the hallway, their shoes squeaking against the clean floors. The building that had once been empty now pulsed with the rhythm of life and renewal. Daniel had begun spending more time outside, walking by the river after his morning meetings. The path had become a kind of meditation, a reminder of where the journey had started the night he found a frightened girl waiting on a subway bench. The memory no longer hurt. It had transformed into something tender, a light he carried with him wherever he went. One morning, as he stood near the garden, Rosa approached him with a cup of coffee. Her apron was dusted with flour, and a streak of it brushed her cheek. You have that faraway look again, she said, handing him the cup. He smiled. Just thinking. About the foundation? She asked. About everything, Daniel said. How it all began with one choice. One small moment. Rosa nodded, understanding without needing explanation. Kindness always starts small. But once it finds a home, it never stops growing. Daniel looked toward the marigolds blooming along the fence, their bright orange petals swaying in the breeze. You are right, he said quietly. It keeps growing. Later that afternoon, the home received a visit from a local reporter who wanted to write a story about the foundation. Daniel agreed to the interview but insisted the focus be on the people, not on him. The reporter, a young woman with kind eyes, asked questions about the origin of the center, about what made it different from others. It is not just a shelter, Daniel said. It is a place that reminds people they are still worthy of love and purpose. Everyone here helps someone else. That is what keeps it alive. The reporter smiled. And what keeps you here? Daniel hesitated, glancing toward Lila, who was sitting by the window helping a younger child draw. Hope, he said finally. She keeps me here. When the article was published a week later, it carried the headline, The Billionaire Who Built Hope. The story spread quickly, and soon letters began arriving, notes from strangers who had read about the home and wanted to help. Some offered donations, others simply wrote to share their own stories of second chances. The home became a symbol not just for the city, but for anyone who had ever needed to start over. One evening, Daniel sat in the courtyard surrounded by those letters, reading them under the soft glow of the hanging lights. Lila joined him, carrying a glass of lemonade. Are those from people far away? She asked, curiosity bright in her eyes. Yes, Daniel said, from all over. Some from people who were once lost, like us. She tilted her head. Do you think they will come here someday? Maybe, Daniel said. Or maybe they will build their own homes somewhere else. Lila smiled. Then it will be like a family that keeps growing. Daniel looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. That is exactly what it is. A moment of silence passed between them, filled with the hum of crickets and the faint sound of music from inside. Then Lila asked softly, Do you ever miss who you were before? Daniel thought for a long moment. No, he said, because who I was then could never have met you. She grinned. Then I am glad you changed. So am I, he said. As night fell, the marigolds glowed faintly in the dim light, their bright petals reflecting gold even in darkness. Daniel watched Lila chase fireflies near the garden, her laughter echoing like a song he never wanted to end. He realized that the world would always carry its share of pain, but it would also always carry its share of light. And sometimes, if a person was brave enough to stop and care, the two could meet, and in that meeting, life could begin again. As he looked up at the sky, dotted with stars, Daniel whispered a quiet truth that had taken him a lifetime to learn. Kindness is not what we give away, it is what we become. Autumn arrived quietly, brushing gold across the city. The air grew cooler, the trees by the river turning shades of amber and red. Inside, the second chance's home, the rhythm of life continued, steady, warm, and full. The laughter of children mixed with the sound of soft music from the dining hall, and the scent of baked bread drifted through the corridors. Daniel had begun to notice the changes in himself more clearly. His days no longer revolved around meetings or numbers. Instead, they were built from smaller, gentler things: checking on the garden, fixing a leaky faucet, or reading bedtime stories to the children who still carried the echoes of fear in their dreams. Each act felt like a quiet promise. The world could be kind again. One crisp morning, Lila came running into his office, her hair braided neatly and her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mr. Daniel," she said, holding up a letter. "It is from the mayor's office." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "The mayor?" She nodded eagerly. "They want to give you an award for helping the city." He took the envelope and read the letter carefully. It was formal, full of words like recognition, leadership, and service. But as he read, all he could think about was that cold night at the subway station, the night when everything began not with leadership, but with a frightened child's voice saying, "My mom left without me." He folded the letter and handed it back. "That is not just for me," he said. "It belongs to everyone here, you, your mom, and everyone who helped make this place real." Lila frowned. "But they are giving it to you." Daniel smiled gently. "Then we will share it." Later that week, the mayor's office organized a small ceremony in the city hall courtyard. Volunteers from the foundation, residents from the home, and community members all gathered to celebrate. Rosa wore her best dress, the same blue one she had worn when she was released from the recovery center. Lila stood beside her, proudly holding Daniel's hand. When the mayor called his name, Daniel stepped forward. The applause was warm but humble, filled with genuine respect. He accepted the plaque, looked out at the crowd, and said, "This is not an award for one person. It is proof that kindness can rebuild what the world breaks. I was lost once, just like many who came to our home, but a small voice reminded me that compassion still exists. That voice changed everything." He glanced at Lila, whose eyes glistened with pride. "She taught me that love does not need to be earned, it only needs to be given." When the ceremony ended, Rosa and Lila ran to him. "You did great," Rosa said, smiling. Lila grinned. "You almost made Mom cry." Daniel laughed softly. "That was not my intention." Back at the Second Chance's home, they placed the plaque on the wall near the front entrance. It was surrounded by photographs, the first families who moved in, the volunteers who helped build the place, and a framed copy of Lila's essay titled, "The Night Kindness Found Me." Rosa looked at the wall thoughtfully. "It feels like a storybook," she said. "A story that keeps writing itself." Daniel nodded. "And we are just on the middle page." As evening fell, the residents gathered for dinner. The smell of stew filled the air, and the sound of laughter echoed from every corner. Lila climbed onto her usual chair beside Daniel and whispered, "Do you think there will be another home someday? Like this one, but in another city?" Daniel looked around the table at the mothers holding babies, at the fathers repairing broken toys, at the children sharing smiles that no longer looked afraid. "Yes," he said softly, "there will be many more." "How do you know?" Lila asked. "Because kindness spreads," he said, "and you cannot stop what grows from love." Lila smiled, resting her head against his arm. "Then it will never end." Outside, the wind moved gently through the marigolds in the garden. Their petals glowed orange under the light of the porch lamps, steady and alive. Daniel looked out the window and thought of every person who had walked through those doors, each one carrying pain, leaving with hope. He realized that the home had not only changed the city, it had changed him forever. And as laughter filled the room, he whispered to himself, "Second chances are not given once. They are given every day, in every act of love that refuses to fade." Winter returned again, softer this time, almost kind. Snow drifted down over the city in slow, quiet spirals, landing gently on the roof of the Second Chance's home. Inside, the halls glowed with warm light and the hum of life. The building no longer felt like a miracle. It felt like something that had always been meant to exist. Daniel stood by the window of his office, watching as Lila and the other children built a snowman in the courtyard. Their laughter rose through the air like bells. The marigolds that once lined the garden were gone for the season, buried under a thin blanket of snow, but Daniel knew they would bloom again. Everything that mattered always did. Rosa entered the room carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. "You are staring again," she said, smiling as she handed him one. "Just remembering," he replied. "It feels like a long time ago." "It was," she said softly. "But also, it was yesterday." Daniel nodded. "You are right." They stood in silence for a while, watching the children outside. Lila was laughing, her coat covered in white snow. She was taller now, her face a little older, her smile still as bright as the first day he met her. Rosa sighed softly. "She has grown so much," she said. "Sometimes I look at her and wonder how we ever got here." "You got here because you never gave up," Daniel said. Rosa smiled faintly. "And because you stopped to care." He looked at her, his voice gentle. "We both did." A knock on the door interrupted them. Lila poked her head in, cheeks pink from the cold. "Mr. Daniel," she said, "we finished the snowman, but he needs a hat. Do you have one?" Daniel chuckled. "I think I might." He reached for the old black fedora that sat on the shelf, a hat he had once worn to board meetings and charity galas. It had been collecting dust for years. He placed it on her small head. "This one is lucky," he said. "It has seen many winters." Lila grinned and ran back outside, shouting, "He said yes." Rosa laughed quietly. "You know she will keep that hat forever." "I hope she does," Daniel said. "It suits her better than it ever suited me." That evening, as the sky dimmed into blue, everyone gathered in the dining hall for the annual winter dinner. The tables were covered in homemade dishes, soups, casseroles, pies, and bread. The room buzzed with conversation and music. On one wall hung the plaque from the mayor's office, framed beside a picture of the first families who had moved into the home. Above it was a small sign painted by the children that read, "Kindness lives here." After dinner, Daniel stood to speak. The room fell silent. Every face turned toward him. "When this began," he said, "I thought I was building a place for others to heal. What I did not realize was that I was healing too. Every person here has given me something I never expected: hope, the kind that does not fade with time." He paused, looking around the room. "The world outside these walls can still be hard. But if you take even a little of what you found here, the kindness, the courage, the faith, you will change it, one heart at a time." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Lila ran up and threw her arms around him. "You are not allowed to retire," she said. "We still need you." He laughed softly, kneeling to her height. "I am not going anywhere, but one day, you will not need me at all." "I do not believe that," she said. "You will," he said, smiling. "And when that day comes, you will help someone else. That is how kindness keeps going." Lila thought for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "Then I promise I will." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and endless. The light from the windows spilled across the courtyard, casting long golden shapes on the white ground. The snowman stood near the marigold garden, wearing Daniel's hat, a crooked smile drawn with pieces of coal. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Daniel stepped outside one last time. The air was still, the kind of quiet that only comes after a snowfall. He looked up at the sky, where the stars shimmered faintly through the clouds, and he whispered, "Thank you." He was not sure who he was thanking, perhaps the universe, perhaps the girl who once waited alone in a subway station, or perhaps the part of himself that had finally learned how to love again. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter from inside the home. Daniel smiled, closed his eyes, and let the peace settle over him. The Second Chance's home glowed behind him, a beacon against the winter night, a promise that no matter how dark the world became, kindness would always find its way back.